Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Not too long ago, I posted a video where I was talking about the price of comics. And during that video, it occurred to me as I was talking about when I first started getting into comics and what the price was in comparison to what they are now and what we get now and all that stuff. It occurred to me that the price of the comics that I bought then is the same number as how many years I have been collecting, reading, and loving comics, which has been 35 years. So when I first started, this is in the fall of 1978, comics were 35 cents, and as many Marvel comics said at the time, still 35 cents, or still only 35 cents, or something like that. And it just got me thinking about the 35 years that I've been doing this. And while it's only been recent that I've delved into podcasting and blogging and the video stuff that I've been doing more recently, there's a lot of intervening years there where I was just a fan. I was a reader. And back then, of course, there wasn't this instant information glut that we have these days. And any information that you got was pretty much gleaned from your local comic shop, or people who happen to read trade magazines of some sort, which I never did. I didn't start doing that until more recently. Well, nowadays, actually, you don't really need trade magazines. You have the internet, and you have Twitter and Facebook and various comic-based news outlets that I simply did not have when I was a kid. Anyway, so it just got me thinking about 35 years ago and what's happened since the fall of 1978. And I've been through all the price changes and the rise of the direct market and comic shops being an actual thing across the country, whereas I believe, and I'm going off my bad memory and my lack of history, so I'm sure there are people out there who can correct me on some of this stuff, and please do. But there weren't that many comic shops that I was aware of back then. Comics, I bought comics, and people of my age, more or less, my generation, bought comics at grocery stores and news outlets, that kind of a thing. Mostly grocery stores, though. But anyway, so I saw the rise of the comic book shop, the direct market, the beginning of the mini series, the limited series. DC's basically their first huge crisis, the revamping the universe, the rise of Image and the independence, and with Image the rise of the artist as a star. And then I think for a while we got a lot of comics that were pretty much, the artists kind of having the control. And then we saw the rise of the writer again in more recent years. And maybe now it's more blended. I don't know. I think it depends on the book. And there doesn't seem to be a company-wide, the writer is the king or the artist is the king anymore. That's just my impression. And that's all this stuff is. These are just my opinions. These are just my impressions of the state of comic books right now. Anyway, so and then with Marvel, they had that creative renaissance with from my perspective anyway, with the writers, with Brian Michael Bendis and all the others that where story and writing was king, and they had the Marvel Architects, and then they did the Marvel Now thing. And that seems to be more of a collaboration between writer and artist, and with the Marvel Now especially, and they've been pretty successful producing some things. Which leads me to DC. Now, I commented on this a couple episodes ago, where I talked about an iTunes review that the podcast received, where the person felt that I was a DC guy, and I just don't see how bad the New 52 stuff is. And I made a comment then that I don't think that person really listened to all of the episodes in which I talked about DC stuff and the Marvel Now stuff, because I was critical of some DC things. But what I didn't talk about on those DC episodes was that I'm really not liking the DC universe. And I would say, that I am a DC guy. When you're a comic book fan growing up as I did, you were a DC fan or you were a Marvel fan. Now you could say you were both. And I was to some degree. But in terms of how many things that you read, I was primarily DC, because I loved that universe. I love those characters more than any other comic universe that's out there. That's not to say that I don't love Marvel and the characters there. I do. I just like the DC stuff just a little bit better, is the best way to put that. So it pains me to admit that I'm not liking the direction the New 52 has gone. Now, when the New 52 first launched, and I basically picked up almost every title that came out that first month, and for the first few months too, because I wanted to get a sense of where these titles were going. I was pretty excited. I will admit, I was a little trepidatious about it, relaunching the universe, but I'd been through it before. Like I said, I've been through the first Crisis, the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the other crises that came along, and I'm even used to it with relaunches within titles like the Legion of Superheroes. They rebooted their universe several times. So it's not an unfamiliar concept to me. And in many ways, I think it's a neat idea. Although one could argue that perhaps it's a last-ditch effort when all of the ideas in the direction that you have been going are failing. So let's just reboot it and restart it, start fresh, and see what happens. So I'm a little concerned about that idea. But like I said, I've gone through it many times with DC. Specifically, I think Marvel's done it too in various ways, just not as directly as perhaps as DC. So going into the New 52, like I said, I was excited about it and hopeful. That's probably the best way to put it. I was very hopeful at what we would get out of this relaunch, this new universe that DC was inhabiting. And then we started to get the details about, we're 5 years in, but then the whole Batman and Green Lantern titles, because they were doing so well, they weren't, their histories weren't as messed with as and modified as much as the rest of the line, the rest of the characters. And then, then we get how many Robins in 5 years ish, and then they start coming out with, Batman probably was working, behind the scenes before those 5 years started. But that still doesn't work. Oh, wait, Tim Drake wasn't actually Robin, he was Red Robin, and things like that, where they start messing with that. And then, there was a Teen Titans before Tim Drake's Teen Titans in the New 52, but then, they took that back out. It's that sloppiness and what appears to be a lack of attention to detail and decisions, just simply making the decisions and sticking with them. Now, I can argue both sides. It's like, well, this is a new universe. Details tend to be missed, perhaps, and or they simply think better of what they decided upon, and they can just retroactively, decide that the Teen Titans didn't exist before. And I'm fine with that too, to a certain degree. It's really not about that where I'm going with this. It's about just the general sense of the DC universe. Now we're 2 years into it, and the DC universe isn't a place that I would want to be any longer. Whereas before, it's like, what fictional universe would you like to go visit? Well, my first answer has always been the DC universe. Now I'm not so sure. The one thing I noticed about a lot of the comics that I read throughout these last 2 years is that, there's a lot of violence, and they're really kind of bloody. And while in many ways that's more quote unquote sophisticated storytelling, at the same time, it just gets, I don't know, old real quick, for me anyway. And maybe I'm just, getting old and curmudgeon-y and, whatever else you want to say, but I'm not enjoying that aspect of the DC universe. Now, there are some bright spots. There's Azzarello and Chang's Wonder Woman. There's Tomasi and Gleason's Batman and Robin. And a bunch of, and those are just two of the bunch that I read, but I don't know. I was afraid that this might be a bit rambling, and I think I'm starting to head into that direction. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about Marvel and the independent stuff. So after the New 52 news and the launch and all that stuff, Marvel comes out with the Marvel Now initiative. And and I did this too. I kind of poo-pooed it, and this is a reaction to DC and all that stuff. Whatever. Marvel went and shook the trees, and out came a lot of interesting ideas and interesting stories. And I have to admit, I think Marvel did it better, which is really weird coming out of my mouth, being pro DC for so long as I have been. I'm reading Superior Spider-Man, and have since it launched, and I haven't read a Spider-Man comic, an ongoing Spider-Man comic, since, God, I think the late 80s. Thor: God of Thunder is one of the best books that's being published in comics right now. Jason Aaron is killing it on that, with Esad Ribic on the art. For the most part, it's been excellent. Mark Waid's Daredevil has been great from the get-go. Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, another great title. And they're all doing, slightly different takes on the characters, but taking them in interesting places. And I can't really, except for a few exceptions, really, Wonder Woman's the only one I can think of at the moment. That's the only one that's jumping out in my mind as I'm talking about this over at DC. And then you get the independents. When I was younger, I couldn't, what the rise of the independents. That's one of the things that has come out of the last 35 years. With Image, starting with Image, really. I mean, there were independent comic publishers before then, but Image really put the independent moniker, successful independent moniker on the map. And other publishers have followed. You have Dark Horse and IDW and Dynamite and all the other ones that you look at in previews every month. But it's been only in the last few years, I think, where Image has grown. They've been growing for many years now, but they've come onto my radar as a publisher of interesting, mature works. And it's been in the last few years, really, where a lot of these great talents, both writers and artists, have been moving to Image or other independent publishers, away from the big two, but especially DC, because of I'm only speculating at this point, but it appears to me to be all of the editorial and top-down decisions that are basically, from this fan's perspective, pushing out the talent, pushing them away because they're not doing things the DC way, whatever the hell that is now. So they're going to Image and whatnot, like I said. And there's been some really, really great stuff coming out recently. Saga comes to mind. It's winning so many awards. Revival is another one. Anytime I do a new comics ordered video, I talk about, or a previews episode here on the podcast, I talk about more and more about the independent stuff that I'm getting, and especially this book's coming out of Image. And to a lesser degree, IDW, Boom, Dynamite, those are companies that I basically wrote off. Oh, and Dark Horse, I wrote off as basically licensees. They'll license a TV show or a toy line or whatever, and they'll make a comic out of it. But they've been really stepping up themselves to produce interesting stories, interesting books, whether it's the superhero genre or some other genre. It doesn't matter. They're really, I think what we're seeing here is here's another renaissance of the independents, and people are finally starting to glom onto that. Or maybe it's just me. It's not, I've been reading independent stuff throughout this for most of this time period, but like one title every, I don't know, 5 years or so, and that's mostly because I didn't know about them. I wasn't a user of previews, and it's only been the last maybe about 5 years. About 5 years where I've been getting previews regularly. That, and the fact that I make a lot more money now than I used to. A lot more money. And I've been putting a lot more money into my comic book hobby. And so I've been looking for new and interesting things to read. And so it's not just that I'm getting away from Marvel and DC. It's just that with all these things going on, all these factors, I paid more attention to what was coming out from other people, or I would follow a creator into some creator-owned work that they did, and that led me to other things. So it's really exciting for me right now to go through previews every month and find something new from a publisher that I had never, maybe even never heard of before, or, I go to Image or any of the other ones that I mentioned and find something new that they're putting out that I go, that looks interesting. I'm going to order it. And my fear here is that if DC keeps doing what they're doing, like I said, with the editorial edicts and the gimmicks, everything old is new again. It seems like to me, and being nearly 45 years old right now, it seems to me that we get this cyclical nature. About every 20 years, we get a repeat of something that happened 20 years previous. And it seems like we're seeing a lot of the 90s stuff come back in DC. A lot of stuff that I made fun of coming out of Marvel and DC at that time in the 90s, which kind of drove me away from the superhero genre, which is the genre that got me into comics in the first place. And it's still a genre that I absolutely love. In the 90s, I pretty much read Vertigo titles, and that was about it. A few superhero titles I stuck with, like Titans and Legion, and there's some others too. I rarely read any Marvel comics. If I did, it was just to read a certain story arc or something. Until the late 90s, and that's when I found out that Brian Michael Bendis was doing Daredevil, And that led me into even more Marvel stuff, to the point now where I read a lot of Marvel stuff. Anyway, so it seems like we're having a bit of a 90s resurgence with these gimmicks and the 3D covers and the die cut chromium crap, and I don't know. I think most people look at the 90s period of comics with a bit of disdain, and rightly so. Now, that's not to say that the entire run of comics during that period of time sucked. They didn't. There was some good stuff that came out during that time. But for the most part, things are not well regarded. And yet what I see from DC, especially right now, is a lot of retreading of ideas, at least in terms of how to drum up sales. And I know that there are some people out there who kind of blame Bob Harris for that, who was working at Marvel during that time period. And I've heard, stories from people who heard it from this person, third, fourth, whatever hand. I'm not going to go into those, but it does paint a bit of a picture. And so I'm starting to wonder, maybe Bob Harris should go. But, you still have Jeff Johns as creative officer. You've got Dan DiDio and Jim Lee as co-publishers. It seems like they could do something about that, or, maybe they just don't care. But I don't believe that, based on everything I've read about, especially Johns and, well, no, all three of them. Things I've read about, interviews I've listened to, these guys care about comics. They care about DC Comics. They care about what they're doing. And I guess, I don't know, maybe it's I think creative companies go through this where we gotta be number one, and we gotta make more money, and especially publicly held companies, you gotta please the shareholders. I'm assuming because DC is part of Warner that's the issue. That may be an issue here, but or maybe just DC just got tired of being number two all the time. And when they did the New 52, they were number one for quite a while there. They were outselling Marvel. They had a lot of the top 10 titles for a long time. I don't know, maybe they're just grasping at straws, trying to find the next thing that will make them number one. And that really bothers me. And I'm picking on DC, but I think a lot of the comic companies try to do what they can to sell more stuff, and that's not a fault. I mean, that's what they're in business for, to put out a creative product, but to make money. But is this what I worry about? Is this the dying gasp of an industry that I have loved for 35 years? And maybe I'm getting all doom and gloomy, but it really bothers me. The price of comics are bothering me. The lack of creative vision in some companies' cases bothers me. The lack of growth of subgenres in comics bothers me. The lack of fandom, for that matter, for not embracing these other qualities about comics that make the genre so good and entertaining. It's not just Marvel and DC, guys. It's not just superheroes. There's a whole ton of stuff out there that's really good stuff. But we don't support, it seems like, the good stuff. And I'm guilty of that too. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I have done everything exactly the right way in terms of how to be the best comic fan ever. I don't even know what that means. But it just bothers me. The state of the comic book industry just kind of bothers me, and I'm worried about it because this comic books has been the biggest thing in my life for the longest period in my life. I mean, other than family, of course, certain family. But I'm getting to the point where I lost my mother many years ago. I lost my sister a few years ago. I don't really have a good relationship with extended family on my adoptive father's side. And I've lost touch with the family on my mother's side. I have my family, my wife and my kids and my grandkids that live with us now, that you've heard on the show in the past if you've listened to some of those episodes. But they are, half my life or less than half of my life in some cases. Comics has always been there. Comics has pretty much been the constant since I was about 10. To the point where I have the room in my basement here in my house where I've got a bunch of comic drawers filled with comics. I've got 2 bookshelves of 2.5. I'm sorry. I've got 1.5 bookshelves that are just devoted to trades that I've bought. I do a podcast. I have a blog. I now do videos about comic books. And I listen to podcasts, and I listen to people, and I read their stuff, talking and writing about comic books. It's just something that I love so dearly. And I'm worried about the industry. And I worry about a time where I won't get any new stuff. I'll just be, that old guy losing his hair already more than I am. Going through my back issues and going, God, the 1980s were so good. Or the mid 2000s were so good. Whatever. Anyway, I think I'm about done. I'm rambling and starting to ramble a little bit, I think. What do you think about the state of the comic book industry? Am I just a doomsayer getting on my soapbox and I really have nothing to worry about? Or, do my points resonate with you in some way? Let me know. You can email me at longboxreview@gmail.com. You can also call me on my voicemail number at 208-953-1841, or you can leave comments at the blog at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Thanks for listening.